Welcome to the 310 Cessna. Penny is her name, and she's just undergone 10 months of annual inspection and maintenance. I'm just getting her fired up here, so I'm bringing the mixtures to the rich position. I've set the props, I've got the throttles cracked open, and then I'm going to run the boost pump on high for about 8 seconds, not particularly warm. So I'll just verify the fuel position levers there, and then once that's been primed for about 8 seconds, obviously we want to make sure the magnetos are on, depress the starter button, and away she goes. And then I'll repeat that procedure on the second engine. So my whole day has been getting ready for this test flight. As I said, it's been 10 months. A lot of that delay was caused by inability to get hold of certain parts, and also a lot of the delay was just caused by the amount of work I've had to do to the aircraft. Almost 400 hours went into this annual inspection. I've gone through pretty much every single system in the aircraft. There were major problems with the landing gear that required rigging and adjustment. Items were becoming bound up, bolts were in the wrong way round. The list sort of goes on there. The flaps as well, while they seem to operate quite nicely, had some major errors with them as well. Over 17 hours just to sort the flaps out, and the main problem for the flap system actually came from a repair that was done on the hinge line of the inboard left flap, and this caused the flap to hang a little low, so they adjusted the push rod there to pull it up tighter, but that's supposed to have a specific length set in accordance with the maintenance manual, and then that just caused the problem to sort of flow downstream from there and really make an issue. So needless to say, with that amount of work done and that amount of systems checked, both engines are out, new propellers are on the aircraft, getting ready to go has been an all-day event. Making sure that we've not missed anything, and I did find a couple of screws that needed tightening on an inspection cover, and just double checking tire pressures and double checking wiring. I had done a few maintenance ground runs ahead of time to set up the fuel flow, so I do know that it at least runs, but this is still a big deal. So I wanted no distractions, nobody around, and just sort of spent the day doing a very thorough walk around and a detailed inspection, going through my maintenance lists and making sure that I had triple checked now everything that I had done. So I'm going to check the controls here for free and clear. I actually just read in one of the accidents reported in the Twin Cessnas magazine that a Twin Cessna recently coming out of paint and maintenance took off on the runway and got to rotate speed, realized the controls were not free and clear or weren't available, closed the throttles, but overran the runway. So these accidents do happen. So we'll double check that the controls are free and clear, setting the barometric pressures here for the altimeters. I've obviously listened to the ATIS. I've checked the NOTAMs for the airport and make sure that that's all available. I've checked the NOTAMs for the airports nearby me as well, in case I end up having to divert somewhere else. We have one big runway at Peterborough, and there's been a number of occasions where a gear up or something like that, disabled aircraft, has closed the entire airport. So you want to make sure you've got somewhere else you can go to if necessary. I've got a good amount of fuel on board. I've checked that myself by both physically dipping the tanks and also verifying what's on the gauges, and I have far more than I'm expecting to need for this particular flight today. I'm nervous. I will definitely, not like a crazy sick to your stomach kind of nervous, but you're definitely feeling a little apprehensive about flying something that you've had so far apart for such a long time. I think that's a good thing though. It kind of keeps you alert, keeps you on your toes, and it means that you're respecting the aircraft and what's been done to it. First start since November. Okay, ready? So taxiing out, again, as I said, I've done a few ground runs on the aircraft, and that included taxiing. I ended up redoing brakes on the aircraft in terms of O-rings and bleeding, so want to make sure they're obviously all working, and just getting familiar with the airplane again. It's been 10 months since I flew it. I've been doing quite a bit of flying in a R model 310 over the summer season here, so it's not like I haven't flown a 310 at all, but this D model is quite a bit different in terms of its interior feeling, layout of controls, and also just the lack of a great big long nose sticking out in front of me. It's definitely feeling a little foreign at the moment. So again, taking things really cautiously and really steady. I'm now in the run-up bay and obviously consulting the checklist for making sure everything is in working order before takeoff. I do the run-up on the 310 with both engines at once. I bring them up to 1700 RPM with the props in the fine position and the mixtures rich. Very important to make sure the nose wheel's straight when doing this. I'm obviously then looking at fuel pressures, RPM indication, and oil temperatures and pressures. Once I've got them nicely set up at 1700 RPM, I'm going to cycle through the magnetos one at a time and note the drop that I get on each one, making sure I don't exceed 150 RPM drop on one ignition source. I'll then cycle the propellers. These are new propellers on. I have done ground runs on the aircraft, but I'll cycle them at least 3 times, and quite often if the airplane hasn't flown in a while for the first flight of the day, I will do 5 cycles on the propeller. I cycle the propellers one at a time just so I can keep focused on what it is I'm doing. I'll then check the mixtures, and I'm just looking for drops in the fuel pressures. Once we've gone through all of the engine checks, I always make sure I do my run-up in a position where when I leave the run-up area, I can turn and look at the area I was just parked in. This allows me to take a look at what's on the ground underneath the aircraft where I just did the run-up. Have I been losing oil out the bottom of the cowling or out the back of the engine? And if so, I may not notice it if I just, taxied from this position straight out to the runway. Especially on aircraft like, say, with low forward visibility, like the biplane that I fly regularly, this is really important to sort of taxi out, take a look, make sure there isn't a great big mess there. And even recently at the airport here, we did actually have someone who had a ruptured oil cooler and was losing oil, but because of the way the aircraft was set up and configured, they weren't able to see that oil leak on the ground or in flight. So the only way they could have caught it would have been to have a look at where they did the run-up, because they did leave a pretty good oil stain on the ground there. So that's just a little piece of information that I learned from another pilot, and make sure that I do, and I think it does have some great benefits. So once we've got everything done on the run-up side of things, I'm just making some notes on a couple of items, a few adjustments I need to make. The idle on the right engine is a little on the low side, so I'm going to want to tweak that when we come back around to doing a bit more ground adjusting. And then I want to make sure everything is set correctly for takeoff, and I'm mentally preparing myself for the flight now. I'm going to want to have a briefing completed, the type of takeoff I'm doing, what my go no-go point's going to be, where my crosswind's going to be coming from, what my speeds are going to be in terms of rotating and then climbing, what I'm going to do in the event of abnormality or some sort of an emergency. The 7,000 foot runway available here, I'm going to be, if I'm on the ground still, closing the throttles, bringing the aircraft to a stop on the runway available ahead of me. If I've reached my rotate speed of, today I'm using 95 miles an hour, and I'm airborne, I've got a short window of time where a landing straight ahead is possible. As soon as that is not possible, I'm going to retract the gear and get the gear up. At that point, an engine failure or some other sort of emergency like that, but with the gear already coming up, I'm now committed to flying the airplane. So Once the gear's up or coming up or in transit, engine failure is going to be a continuation of flight. So obviously identify, verify, feather that inoperative engine and secure it and return for a landing. Anything not pertaining to the engine controls or anything like that, but some sort of other emergency, say a fire or a complete electrical failure or something like that, it's a beautiful VFR day. So again, I would just brief to myself that I'm coming around and going to land on the runway. The go, no-go point's really important because you want to use your expected takeoff performance to set a position on the runway that you expect to be in the air. If you're not in the air by that point, you want to abort. And this could be for a number of reasons. One of which might be aircraft not developing the power that you're expecting, and therefore you may have difficulty with the climb out afterwards. So I've lined up on the runway. I'm pretty sure I've got everything checked, double and triple checked that I could possibly do. I'm very slow and steady bringing the power up. I do notice a bit of irregularity in the controls here, and I had briefed that I may experience a little bit of that and given myself some tolerances on it. So a little tweak of the prop and one mixture control seem to sort that for now. My checks down the runway are looking for, okay, full power set, airspeed alive, temperatures and pressures in the green, looking for 95. And then at the 95, I'm rotating the aircraft. And then as you see here in the climb out, I've already pulled the gear up once I've run out of sufficient runway to land straight ahead. And now I'm just making a few adjustments to the engine controls, setting up my climb performance, which is going to be 2,500 RPM, 24 inches of manifold pressure. Other than a little tweak needed on the one prop control, which I note then that I need to adjust the pitch stop for the governor, everything seems to be going very nicely. A little bit too much on the fuel flow, which surprised me because I'd just done the whole setup on the fuel systems in accordance with the M0 maintenance manual. I am thinking that having a little bit of difficulty just with these engines having sat for so long, so my intention right now is to fly the aircraft and try and get at least 25 hours on it in fairly quick sequence, making small little maintenance adjustments to items as we go, but just trying to get the aircraft back into regular service. So far I've really noticed that things are settling down, smoothing out, and seem to be running a lot nicer. That will all get evaluated again, obviously, as we move on, and at the end of the 25 hours I'm going to have a fairly in-depth look at the aircraft to make sure everything's going well. So that's the test flight on the 310. Just over 10 months being on the ground and almost 400 hours of maintenance. I mean, at least it's all been done by myself, I suppose, but as I said, definitely a flight you need to take very seriously with a lot of potential for things to be going wrong. Keys to success here were making sure there was no distractions, giving myself an entire day with nothing else on the agenda. That's hard to do because I've got way too much to do, but I thought it was very important to have no other distractions or anything else I needed to do that day. Spending an enormous amount of time on the walk around and thoroughly going through everything that I had touched and double checking everything. Fuel quantities as well as oil levels, not making any assumptions. I then also went through all my paperwork to make sure I had filled out and got everything correct and lined up there. Making sure I had good weather for the day that I was flying. No NOTAMs or airport closures nearby. I had alternate airports I could go to if there was some sort of a problem, and again, sufficient fuel to do so. I made sure that I was in the right mindset for the flight and had kind of briefed myself thoroughly on what it was I wanted to do, what systems I wanted to check, and how I was going to deal with different emergencies, whether that be low oil pressure, a prop that immediately started leaking, an engine that started running very rough, or some sort of electrical or mechanical failure. I hope you found this a little bit enjoyable and maybe a bit interesting to go through with me. I encourage you all to get out there, get as much flying done as possible. Anytime the airplane comes out of maintenance and you're collecting it again, really make sure you go through it carefully and make sure that everything's in top condition, because anytime we're playing with stuff, we've got the potential for making a problem. Stay safe, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the content. Happy tailwinds.